Hi, my name's Delara, and my parents drained my entire life savings without ever asking. They called it a temporary loan, said I'd bounce back. But what they really did was erase me from our family finances, from our legacy, from every plan they whispered behind closed doors. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I found an old folded map in my grandfather's handwriting, a signature, a boundary, my name, written in ink they thought would stay buried. Why would they hide it? And what else did they try to bury with it? I woke up to the scent of stale coffee still lingering in the kitchen from the day before. Sunlight was already pressing through the slats in the blinds, casting sharp white stripes across the linoleum floor. It was a Tuesday. Nothing special. At 34, routines were my religion. Wake, stretch, check my bank app before brushing my teeth. That morning was no different. Until it was. I thumbed open the banking app while standing in front of the fridge, hoping to remind myself what I had left before closing on the new condo. It took me years to save that down payment. Every coupon clipped, every Friday night in, every freelance tax gig I took on top of my full-time work. I was proud of that number, but the screen didn't show pride. It showed a 0. I blinked, refreshed the app, still 0. My jaw locked so tight I felt the pressure in my ears. I clicked into the transaction history, heart stuttering with each swipe. One massive withdrawal, gone. My entire savings. All of it. Panic set in like a slow-rolling fog. I hadn't shared access with anyone, except my mother. My name was first on the account, but she had secondary access because she said it was just in case. And like a fool, I believed her. I called the bank immediately. After wading through a maze of options and hold music that sounded too cheerful for my reality, a representative finally picked up. "Yes, ma'am," she said politely. The withdrawal was authorized from a registered user on the account. It was processed in person at the West Branch yesterday morning. "Who signed it?" My voice cracked. The woman hesitated. "Lois K. I'm sorry, ma'am. Your mother." The rest of that call blurred. I think I thanked her. Maybe. I know I hung up too softly for the rage curling in my chest. My fingers dialed my mother's number before I could stop myself. She answered after 3 rings, her tone casual. "Delara, honey, everything okay?" I just checked my account. "It's empty," I said, flat. There was a pause. Not shocked, just quiet. "Oh, that," she said like I'd asked about leftover groceries. "It's temporary, sweetie. Callista needed help with the new business, and we figured you weren't using it yet. You're young. You'll make it back." "You figured?" I repeated. "You didn't think to ask me?" "Honey, don't make this a thing," she sighed. "It's family. Callista's struggling and you're resilient." I hung up. I didn't scream. Didn't cry. I stared at the wallpaper in my apartment kitchen, a pattern of fading lemons on white, and felt something inside me click out of place. Later that day, I sat at my desk, looking at old spreadsheets. Years of budgeting, of cutting corners, of turning down trips and dinners and every indulgence while Callista, my older sister, played entrepreneur with other people's money. Of course, it was her. Of course, Mom would call it support when it came to Callista, and you'll bounce back when it came to me. Growing up, Callista was always the one who got saved. Lost her job, Dad covered rent, failed college. They found a program that fit her better. Meanwhile, I was expected to stay quiet and keep everything running. And I did. Sometimes the people you'd take a bullet for are the ones holding the gun. That quote floated to the surface of my thoughts, and for the first time, it didn't feel melodramatic. It felt earned. I opened my laptop, started a new folder. I labeled it Evidence. In it, I dumped every screenshot, every bank statement, every text. I wasn't sure where I was going with it, but I knew this wasn't going to be the end of the story. Not for me. That night, as I sorted old tax receipts and insurance forms, I found something I'd nearly tossed aside. An old copy of my grandfather Reuben's will. He died 5 years ago, and we all thought it was Callista who got most of his estate. But something was off. There were pages, yes, but the final signature, the one that mattered, was missing. I stared at the document, suddenly hyper-aware of my own breathing. This wasn't some forgotten file. It was neatly tucked into a manila folder, buried beneath my mother's labeled House Refi Docs. Why would my grandfather's unsigned will be in her drawer? I didn't sleep. I kept staring at the will like it might explain itself if I waited long enough. The pages felt heavier than they should. Paper that had yellowed around the edges, one corner curled from years of neglect, except it hadn't been neglected, it had been hidden. The signature line at the bottom stared back at me. Blank. It was supposed to carry his name, Reuben A. King. My grandfather signed everything with a fountain pen and a heavy, intentional hand. But this page, the one that determined everything, sat empty. His voice echoed in my head from years back on a quiet evening when we watched the sun dip behind his dusty fields. It'll all go to who earns it, not who demands it. I remembered how I laughed at the time, thinking it was his way of warning Callista not to take anything for granted. Maybe it had been meant for me, too. I took the next morning off work and drove straight to the county clerk's office. I didn't bother with breakfast or makeup, just threw on a jacket and left, file folder in hand. If there were answers to be found, they weren't going to appear in my kitchen. The clerk was kind, maybe in her late 50s, with silver-gray curls and a coffee mug that read, World's Okayest Employee. When I explained I was checking estate filings under Reuben King's name, she didn't blink. We've had a few inquiries on this one, she said, tapping her keyboard. I leaned forward. From who? She clicked a few more times, then turned the screen slightly. Only one consistent name, Callista K., back in early 2019, when probate finalized. I stared at the monitor, jaw tightening. Callista had been managing the family company, but always claimed it was co-owned, funded together by all of us. I asked if I could see the business filing details. She printed them without hesitation, and there it was. Callista listed as 100% owner. No mention of me, no mention of Mom. Nothing about shared investment, joint venture, family fund. I held the document like it burned. Back in the car, I pulled over in a church parking lot and opened my email. I remembered a message Lois had forwarded a few months ago. At the time, I hadn't cared. Now, I searched for the words family agreement. Found it. A scanned document titled Mutual Family Support Agreement. Legalese, polite-sounding language, backdated, and a clause, hidden on page 3, that stated the signer waives all future financial claims related to shared investments, including property and assets, for a period not less than 10 years. The signature box carried a typed name, mine, but no handwriting. I had never signed it. They hadn't just taken my savings. They had written me out. That night, I called Mom. She answered immediately, like she'd been waiting. Delara, she said warmly, as if nothing had happened. Feeling better today? Did you sign something for me? I asked, voice low. Sweetheart, you're spiraling. This is why we didn't want to involve you. You get emotional and jump to conclusions. I kept my voice steady. Did you forge my name? Of course not. That's a serious accusation. Then her tone shifted. Calmer, colder. This was about family legacy. Sometimes we have to make decisions that protect the group. Your sister needed help, and you weren't in a position to lead anything. I stared at the blank television screen in my living room, hearing every word like it was a slap. You stole from me. You took everything I built and handed it to Callista. She's the face of the family, Lois replied smoothly. You're great behind the scenes. Click. I didn't let myself cry. I didn't throw anything. Instead, I started scanning documents, the will, the fake support agreement, my bank statements. I renamed the folders on my computer. Truth, proof, Plan A. If they wanted me silent, they picked the wrong daughter. As the sun dropped outside, the apartment grew still. My laptop screen glowed against the dim walls. The only sound was the quiet click of my mouse as I moved file after file into encrypted folders. At 11:13 p.m., a new email arrived. No sender, no subject line, except, "You deserve to know what really happened to the land Reuben left you." There was a single attachment, a scanned photo of a folded map. At the bottom corner, Barely legible in the pixelated image was a signature. His signature. And just below it, a name I hadn't heard in over 15 years. I hadn't thought about that summer in years, but staring at that email, my breath caught. Not because of what was written, but because of what it attached. My fingers hovered over the mouse before I clicked. It was a scanned image, grainy around the edges, but clear enough in the center. A hand-drawn map labeled West Ridge Boundary, 1995. The handwriting was unmistakably Reuben's, his blocky R, the way he underlined dates twice. A soft gold ink dotted the paper near a specific coordinate, and in the top right corner, just above the margin, was a small scribble, Delara. The moment I saw my name, I was 13 again, sitting under the old oak tree on Reuben's ranch, dirt under my nails, sweat sticking my bangs to my forehead. He had handed me a leather-bound map that day, said it was just a silly treasure hunt. But I remembered the weight in his voice, the way he rested his weathered hand on mine and said, "You'll know when the time's right." At the time, I thought he meant when I was older. Now I understood he meant when I was alone. I closed the email and sat back. Everything around me, the dirty coffee mug, the stack of unopened mail, the dim hum of my old refrigerator, faded. All I could see was that map. The next morning, I made a call I hadn't expected to make again. Branwen picked up on the third ring. "Del?" Her voice carried surprise, the kind that meant you never call unless something's wrong. "Do you still have that box from Camp 2002? After a pause, she said, "You know I do. Why?" "I'm coming over." Her bookstore smelled like dust and lavender, the way it always had. Branwen had been my childhood tether, the only girl in school who knew how to shoot a bow and recite poetry in the same breath. We hadn't spoken much since my father's funeral. But when she hugged me, there wasn't an ounce of hesitation. We sat on the floor behind the counter, flipping through old photo envelopes. She finally pulled one labeled in her messy scrawl, Camp 2002, Grandpa's. Inside were snapshots I didn't even remember we'd taken. Me in overalls, Reuben beside me, both squinting into the sun. And then, the picture that made my heart stutter. I was holding the same leather-bound map. My arms wrapped around it like a prize. Branwen held it up, her brow furrowed. "Your mom always said Callista was the favorite." I didn't laugh. I couldn't. "She told me the map was junk, a story Reuben made up to keep me busy." She tilted her head. "But he signed it. That's not nothing." "I don't think he made it up," I said, voice low. "And I don't think he wanted her to have any of it." We agreed to keep it quiet for now. The last thing I needed was for Callista or Lois to know I had this, not until I understood exactly what I was holding. As I prepared to leave, Branwen hesitated. "Wait," she said. "That will you found, did it have a signature?" "No," I replied. "That's the problem." She pulled up a sample of Reuben's writing from an old thank you card. "Let's compare." Side by side, the signatures matched. Not just matched, they aligned perfectly. Same pressure, same lean, and suddenly, something snapped into focus. The will wasn't incomplete because Reuben forgot. It was incomplete because someone had removed the page. The chill that ran through me had nothing to do with the air. Back home, I sat at my desk with the map and the photos side by side. My hands moved on their own, pulling up satellite images of the land. I found the same ridge, the same crooked tree stump, the same gentle slope that had once seemed like just a hill to play on. It matched. All of it matched. He didn't forget me. I was tracing the lines again, committing every symbol to memory, when my phone rang, unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, but the call came again. Curious, and maybe a little foolish, I answered. A low, gravel voice came through. "You're digging in places you shouldn't." I froze. That map was meant to stay buried. Click. No name. No chance to reply. But I didn't need to. Because I wasn't the one who buried it. They were. The weather was mild that afternoon, but the wind carried a bitter edge, like the house had been waiting to remind me it never wanted me to return. I parked a block away from the home I once helped paint during spring break. Back then, we joked that no matter how tense things got, this house was the one place that couldn't turn its back on us. I rang the doorbell. A full 5 seconds passed before it creaked open, and Callista stood there with one perfectly manicured brow raised. Didn't expect to see you here. Uninvited. I held up the small wooden box. Returning this. It was Grandpa's. She didn't move to let me in, just stepped aside without a word, her heels clicking against the tile as she turned and walked away. I followed slowly, every wall more silent than I remembered. Even the old pendulum clock Reuben used to wind weekly had stopped ticking. Lois emerged from the dining room, arms crossed in her cardigan, mouth already mid-sigh. You don't call, you don't visit. And now you bring tension. I brought back something that didn't belong to me, I said evenly, placing the box on the entryway table. Something rare in this house. She pursed her lips like I'd spat in her soup. Delara, this attitude isn't helping anyone. We've been through a lot lately. You mean what you put me through? Don't do this here. Her voice dipped low, warning. We're not airing dirty laundry in front of Callista. She already knows the stains, I muttered. They moved to the kitchen, likely assuming I'd leave, but my feet didn't follow. Something in me needed to stay, to listen, maybe to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. From the hallway, I caught pieces. She's naive, Callista whispered, the clink of glass in her hand. She's a soft target, Lois replied. Always was. You think she'll keep pushing? She's not built for this. Reuben gave her scraps for a reason. Every word cut with the precision of a scalpel. I pushed open the kitchen door. Both of them jerked their heads toward me. Callista set down her drink, unbothered. You always did like sneaking around corners, she said with a smirk. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw anything. I just said, You really think I'm not cutthroat enough for this family? She shrugged. If you were smarter, you'd know how this works. Power belongs to those who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty. I stepped forward, calm and certain. No, Callista. I just don't think corruption should be a family tradition. Neither of them responded. I walked past them and out onto the back patio, where I pulled my phone from my pocket. A message buzzed from Branwyn. Talk to Uncle Ray. He said the whole family knew about the land. They just assumed you'd never fight for it. My hand trembled, not with fear, but fury. I returned inside, met Lois near the base of the stairs. She tried again, this time with her gentle mother tone, the one she saved for company or manipulation. You don't want to destroy this family over a piece of land, do you? I looked her square in the eye. That land isn't the issue. It's what you buried with it. I left without waiting for her to reply. As I stepped outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the street. My phone vibrated again. A new message. Unknown sender. Ethan here. I've been carrying this too long. I helped Callista and your mom refile the title to the land. I thought I was doing a favor. But I see now it was wrong. I can talk, but not over text. The air left my lungs like I'd been punched. They didn't just manipulate emotions, they altered documents. I climbed into my car and sat for a moment, stunned by the layers unfolding. They hadn't just betrayed me, they had broken laws. A second notification buzzed. Email this time. No sender name, just a subject line. Let's talk. Before it gets ugly. Inside was a forwarded legal document. My name, once printed clearly, was scratched out with red ink. I stared at the screen and let out a quiet breath. They wanted me scared. They'd have to try harder. I stayed parked outside my apartment for almost 10 minutes after getting home from the family house. The email sat open on my phone, subject line clear as a slap to the face. Let's talk. Before it gets ugly. No greeting, no sign-off. Just an attached PDF, half redacted. My name scratched out violently in the margin. The implication was loud enough without the need for an exclamation point. That night, I didn't turn on the lights when I stepped into the apartment. I walked straight to the kitchen table and dropped my keys next to my laptop. My heart wasn't pounding anymore. It was settled, like a tide pulling back before something bigger. They had made it clear, back off or face consequences. I wasn't backing off. I booted up my system, logged into my encrypted drive, and uploaded every document I had. Bank records, title searches, voice memos, screenshots of text threads that most people would scroll past. I opened a new folder labeled Phase 2. I wasn't sure what that meant yet, but it felt right. Because the next move wouldn't be just about protecting myself. It would be about forcing their hand. They already erased me from the family, I said out loud, the words strange in my own voice. I refused to let them erase me from history. The next morning, I called Ethan. He picked up sounding half asleep. Del? I need 10 minutes. You owe me that. He paused. I know. We met at a small cafe in the northeast side of town, the kind of place where everything tasted like cinnamon and gossip. He looked older. Guilt can do that to a man. His eyes met mine across the table, and for once, he didn't try to flirt or spin. I didn't know what I was signing on to, he said. They told me it was just a title correction. You altered official records, I said. I know, and if I'd known they were cutting you out, Delara, I swear, I wouldn't have touched it. Callista made it sound like it was legal cleanup. Said the will was outdated, and your name was on the wrong parcel anyway. I leaned forward. She lied to you. And now you're going to put that in writing. He didn't hesitate. I will. It wasn't vindication, but it was a start. Later that week, Callista hosted a pop-up event downtown to promote her new heritage-inspired lifestyle brand. I hadn't planned on going until I saw the flyer on a coworker's desk. Something in me shifted. I showed up unannounced, dressed in neutral tones, blending into the polished crowd, sipping sparkling kombucha and complimenting woven throw blankets. Callista was glowing in her curated spotlight, all charm and polished teeth. When she spotted me, her face didn't flicker, but her shoulders tensed. I waited until she finished her pitch to a circle of donors before I stepped forward. Quick question, I said, keeping my voice light. Who funded your launch capital? Her smile stiffened. Excuse me? You know, I said, louder now. Your seed funding. Who wrote that check? Murmurs moved through the circle. Callista laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. Delara's always had a flair for drama. No drama, I said, just transparency. The crowd didn't clap, they didn't boo, they simply started looking at her differently. That was enough. By the time I got home, my phone had 2 missed calls and 1 voicemail. It was Lois. You've always had a flair for drama, she echoed, voice sharper this time. Don't ruin what's left of this family for attention. I forwarded it to Jory. She texted back within seconds. That's not just emotional abuse, that's intimidation. Save it. The next morning, I stood outside the county courthouse holding the motion Jory had drafted. It challenged the transfer of title, citing fraud, coercion, and improper execution. I read through the document 3 times before signing. My hand shook. Not from fear, but power. I remembered a quote I'd once seen framed in Reuben's shed. Speak the truth, even if your voice shakes. It was my truth now, and it was finally loud enough to echo. That night, I returned home late. I was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix, tired of watching my back, tired of pretending I didn't know what they were capable of. I dropped my purse on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and headed toward the bedroom. And that's when I saw it. An envelope had been slid under my front door. Thick. Heavy. Inside, a single photograph. Black and white. Me. Walking into the courthouse. Red marker circled my face. No note. Just 3 words written beneath the image. We see you. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope still resting where I'd dropped it the night before. The photo inside stared back at me, black and white, grainy, with my figure circled in red as if I were a target in someone's crosshairs. It had no return address, no fingerprints I could see, just that 3-word message. We see you. I picked it up again, turned it over like it might reveal more the second time around, but it didn't. Nothing except the stale smell of ink and the heat rising in my chest. They wanted fear, but what I felt wasn't fear, it was focus. A sharpened, almost surgical clarity. Later that morning, I met Jory at the cafe we both favored. It was tucked between a secondhand bookstore and a travel insurance office, the kind of place where older couples read newspapers in silence and the barista didn't rush you for lingering too long over tea. She already had her laptop open when I walked in. "Envelope?" she asked, not even looking up. I slid it across the table. Photo, no note, no fingerprints I could tell. She looked at it, then closed the flap without a word. "It's meant to intimidate. Let it remind you they're running scared." We spent the next hour finalizing paperwork. Jory filed a motion to freeze all further land transfers tied to the King estate. It was dry, dense legal language, but every sentence felt like a step forward, a rope around their chaos, tightening. "They're going to escalate now," she said, sipping her tea. "So we escalate smarter, not louder." "I'm not interested in loud," I told her. "I'm interested in done." Back home, I pulled out both versions of the will. One was the clean copy I'd found tucked into my mother's files. The other, the one Callista filed after Reuben died, had red flags waving in the margins, additions I hadn't caught before. Words like reallocation, alternative designation, and a clause that made my stomach turn. Should the heir named herein be deemed unsuitable, all claims are void. Unsuitable. That was the word they'd built their case on, not undeserving, unsuitable, as if I were a hazard, as if they'd been planning this for years. They knew I would break. They expected it. That's why they didn't worry about covering their tracks. The next evening, while I reviewed timelines and receipts, my phone buzzed. I recognized the number as Branwyn's. "Check your inbox," she said without a hello. I refreshed my email. A file download began. One video, 10 minutes long. "Where did you find this?" "In an old backup drive," she replied. It was labeled Garden Day. I nearly deleted it. I opened the video. Reuben's voice, clear and slow, filled the room like incense. "See this fence line?" he said on the video, walking beside me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. I was maybe 12 in the clip, wearing overalls and boots too big for my feet. "This whole stretch here, it'll be yours one day. I already signed it. You're the only one who ever treated it like home." I paused the video, let the silence press against my ribs. It wasn't just sentiment. It was proof, from the man himself. Not on paper, on camera. And then it happened. I was organizing files into a new folder, Final Case Assets, when my screen blinked. Unauthorized access. One file. DeChuck Reuben Final PDF. My breath caught. I dove into the activity log. Someone had accessed my encrypted drive from an IP outside Bakersfield. Within seconds, a message popped up on my phone. Blocked number. Text. "Nice try, Delara. You really thought this was still yours?" I stared at the screen. The rage didn't come all at once. It moved like a tide, rising from somewhere deeper than I'd ever dared touch before. I whispered to no one in particular. "They got into my files. But they'll never get into my conviction." The blinking cursor on my laptop screen pulsed like a silent metronome. It was past 1 a.m., and I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop staring at the access log on my cloud storage account. Someone had been inside my drive, inside the one folder I thought was secure, the one labeled Evidence. I scrolled through the timestamps again, my pulse rising with every click. Whoever it was hadn't just looked. They had downloaded. They knew where to find the most critical files, the ones Jory and I had carefully compiled. And that meant only one thing. I'd been compromised from the inside. My first instinct wasn't fear. It was fury. Sharp, hot, and precise. By late morning, I was in Jory's office with 2 cups of coffee, a printed log, and enough resolve to fuel a full-blown investigation. She didn't flinch when I told her what happened. "We file it," she said simply. "Emergency digital protection. We notify the judge. And we remind them we don't scare easy." "I'm done playing defense," I said, my voice steady. "You want war? Let's get it in writing." We moved fast. Jory filed the motion by noon. By 3 p.m., we had confirmation that a hearing would be added to the docket the following week. I updated my backup protocols and added biometric lock access. Every move they made would be met with 10 from me. But that wasn't the only front. By the time I got home, the real storm had started. On social media. I'd been tagged in a dozen public posts, each more vicious than the last. The first few came from burner accounts, then a few from people I knew. Neighbors, former high school classmates, even a distant cousin. Callista had launched her smear campaign. Her captions were carefully crafted. Some people thrive on conflict. Some of us just want peace. But when you've been used as someone's scapegoat, eventually you have to speak up. The comments below were worse. Sounds like her sister's gone off the rails. We all know the quiet ones hold the deepest grudges. Why would her own mother side against her if she was telling the truth? I scrolled for too long, letting it sink in, letting it sting. Then I closed the app and called Jory. I want to respond, I said. But not emotionally. You want your words to outlast the noise, she said. Let's write it together. We drafted a short, fact-based statement and released it through Jory's firm. No names, no accusations, just lines like, grief reveals character, paper reveals truth. We have both. That night, something strange happened. Amid the garbage, support trickled in, slow, quiet, and steady. I believe you. Thank you for standing up for yourself. Some families use blood as leverage. Others build legacies with silence. And then Lois called, not to apologize, not to reason. You think this ends in court? She hissed. You think some old documents and sympathy from strangers makes you right? I didn't respond. You'll lose everything, Delara, even if you win. My breath was even. That's the difference between us. I'm not scared of starting over. She hung up. 2 days later, Jory called with something she'd uncovered during a records request, a letter from nearly 15 years ago. Dated 6 months before Ruben passed, it had been filed by Lois with a private mediator. It claimed that I had a history of emotional instability and was not psychologically fit to manage long-term property responsibilities. It had never been acted on, but it had never been withdrawn either. They were setting the stage, Jory said. Years before he died. They weren't just reacting to you. They planned for you to fail. My jaw clenched. They didn't want me to break the family. They needed to break me first. That night, as the wind rustled through my apartment window, I tried to journal, something Ruben always told me to do when things got too loud in my head. I'd barely written 2 lines when the knock came. It was almost midnight. I crossed the living room slowly, unsure what I'd find. Through the peephole, I saw her. Merlene, my mother's oldest friend. The one who used to braid my hair while Lois hosted charity luncheons. The woman who'd once called me the quiet king girl. She looked frail in the hallway light, holding a manila folder in trembling hands. I think it's time you saw this, she said softly. Merlene's hands trembled as she laid the folder between us. We were at my apartment, sitting at the kitchen table where I'd once dreamed of planning home renovations, not mapping out legal warfare. She didn't speak at first. Her eyes darted between mine and the manila folder, like she wasn't sure which one scared her more. Your mother made everyone afraid, she finally said, voice thin. I should have said something earlier. I just didn't think she'd go this far. Inside the folder were a dozen emails, Lois corresponding with a property attorney. The tone of the emails wasn't casual. It was clinical. Title transfers. Strategy timelines. One dated 5 months before Ruben's death used a phrase that made my stomach twist. Contingency restructure to exclude DK permanently. And tucked at the very back, folded in thirds, was a letter, signed by Ruben, stating that I was to receive first right to the land in question. Not just a gesture. Legal intent. Jory added it to our court packet within the hour. They built a kingdom on lies, I told her, watching her scan the letter. Time to shake the foundation. A few days later, I received an invitation. An email from Lois, subject line, family mediation dinner. Not an apology, not even a phone call. Still, I said yes. Jory helped me prep. I wore a fitted gray blazer, my hair tied back, and kept my expression neutral as I entered the dining room I hadn't stepped into in years, The air smelled of rosemary roast chicken and forced civility. Lois greeted me at the door with a cold smile. "Glad you came. We thought we'd clear the air." Callista sat at the head of the table like a hostess at a charity gala, legs crossed, wine glass in hand. No one else was there, just the three of us. "I'll cut to it," Callista said. "There's been tension, misunderstandings. We wanted to offer a resolution." Lois slid a document across the table. "A buyout. Modest, but fair." I didn't reach for it. Instead, I pulled out my phone and hit record, openly, visibly. Then I pulled out a copy of the real letter from Ruben and placed it next to the check. "I'm not here to negotiate," I said. "I'm here to expose you." Callista's jaw clenched. "You think this letter undoes everything?" Lois leaned forward, tone icy. "Your grandfather didn't understand business. We did what was best." I met her gaze. "No. You used his death as a blank check. That ends tonight." The room shifted. Not physically, but spiritually. You could feel it. Alliances cracking, walls trembling. And then, someone leaked the recording. It started as a 3-minute clip, me calmly placing the documents on the table, while Lois called me a bitter ingrate who couldn't let go of old jealousy. The video spread fast. Within hours, my inbox was full. She didn't lose her family. She outgrew their corruption. Blood isn't thicker than abuse. I read every word. I saved the screenshots. That night, Lois lingered at the door after the others had left. "You'll regret making this public," she whispered. I didn't blink. "You'll regret thinking I wouldn't." The next morning, I was back at work when the doorbell rang. A courier in a navy windbreaker handed me a thick envelope. Inside was a formal subpoena. Callista had countersued me for defamation and emotional harm. I held the document for a long moment, then slid it onto my kitchen table. "Perfect," I murmured. "Let's bring it all into the light." The subpoena sat in the middle of my kitchen table like a loaded gun. I must have read it 10 times, hoping each time the words would somehow change. Defamation, emotional distress, damage to brand reputation, all wrapped in Callista's signature and a smug legal tone, like she'd finally found her upper hand. I laughed, bitterly, out loud. They exploited me, erased me, and now I'm the villain? I pushed the paper aside and stared at the chipped edge of the table, the same one Ruben once helped me sand down. It was the kind of detail no headline would ever include. No camera crew would care about that memory, that kind of truth. By the next morning, the news had spread. Local stations picked up the lawsuit like it was gossip candy. Social media feud explodes into court battle over family land. One outlet referred to me as a bitter, estranged relative with an axe to grind. Nice touch. They even used an old driver's license photo for the thumbnail. And then came the screenshots. Private messages from over a year ago, snippets of frustration I'd texted Branwyn during one of Callista's live streams. Taken out of context, they painted me as paranoid, combative. One even had me saying, if I could just show the world what they've done. They did. Just not the way I meant it. Online support waned fast. People love an underdog until the fight gets messy. Friends I'd known since school went silent. Colleagues from the bank I'd once freelanced for quietly removed me from a shared alumni group. It wasn't rage that hurt. It was the quiet withdrawal, the steady, invisible unraveling. That night, Jory came by. I didn't even offer her coffee. She pulled out her laptop, sat on my couch, and opened the draft of our next statement. "This isn't about truth anymore," she said gently. "It's about optics." I nodded slowly. Then we control the lens. We prepared a new release, one without heat or blame. It simply restated the facts, dates, filings, legal ownership. It didn't mention names, but it didn't need to. The timeline did all the work. "I'm not here to win sympathy," I told her as she typed. "I'm here to prove the facts. That's it." The statement went live the next morning. And then something unexpected happened. 3 days later, a thick envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of a notarized agreement. The paper was yellowed, but the ink was clear. It bore Ruben's name and another, someone I didn't recognize, signed beside his, notarized by a third party. The title? Temporary Trust Assignment of Western Parcel. My name was listed as the sole beneficiary. Taped to the document was a small yellow sticky note. You don't know me, but I knew your grandfather. He trusted you for a reason. I sat on the floor with it spread across my lap for hours, unable to move. It wasn't just paperwork. It was a whisper from the past saying, "You're not crazy. You're not alone." But even truth doesn't stop pain. That night, I broke. I collapsed on my couch with the lights off, the document still in my hands. I cried, not from loss, not even from betrayal, from the exhaustion of carrying every version of myself that had been dragged through this war. I cried for the girl who used to believe her family had lines they wouldn't cross. I cried for the woman who knew better now. I miss him, I whispered into the dark. I miss who I was before all this. The apartment was too quiet. Even the refrigerator had stopped humming. The next morning, I forced myself up, made coffee, and checked my voicemail. Branwyn. I found something, she said, voice tight. One of Ruben's journals had a name in it, someone none of us ever asked about, but he may have everything. I paused. Who? I'm texting it now, she said. You're going to want to sit down. The message came through moments later. A name I hadn't seen in years. A name that had been erased from family stories. Quietly, purposefully, I stared at the screen. Then it's time we asked. Branwyn met me at the edge of the parking lot, journal in hand, already open to the page we'd spoken about on the phone. Thomas A. King, she said, pointing to the margin where Ruben's handwriting looped in his familiar slant. Does that name mean anything? I didn't answer. I just took out my phone and started searching. 3 hours later, I was standing outside a modest veteran community home on the edge of Fresno County. A nurse led me through a sunlit corridor to a back room that smelled like peppermint tea and old books. The man inside had snow-white hair, a scar above one brow, and a stare sharp enough to slice through pleasantries. You're Delara, he said before I'd spoken a word. You knew my grandfather, I said. Better than most, Thomas replied. You're here about the land. I sat down slowly. He left it to me. But the will, it's been contested. Changed. Thomas opened a drawer beside him and pulled out a plastic folder. Ruben made me notarize a letter before he passed. Didn't trust his own daughter to follow through. He gave me a copy and told me to keep it until the day you came looking. Inside was a signed, notarized statement. Ruben's wishes in his own words. Specific dates. Property lines marked with GPS coordinates. He even referenced me by name. Delara K. King. First right of inheritance to the western parcel, no reassignment without her consent. Thomas slid the folder across the table and looked me square in the eye. Go make it right. Jory nearly cried when I handed her the document. We filed it the next morning with an emergency motion to dismiss Callista's countersuit. The judge took one look at Thomas's notarized letter and asked only one question. Why wasn't this submitted during probate? Jory responded evenly. Because the parties contesting the will ensured it was never found. The judge didn't smile, he didn't nod, but he didn't dismiss us either. And in the world of litigation, that counted as momentum. The following week, I was invited to appear anonymously on a podcast focused on estate abuse and familial fraud. I hesitated. I didn't want to be the face of another broken family, paraded out for clicks and sympathy. But I went. I spoke clearly, plainly. I didn't dramatize, didn't attack. I just told the truth. What it felt like to be erased. What it meant to rebuild your voice, document by document. The episode aired on a Friday. By Sunday, strangers were sending messages, not just of support, but of shared experience. My brother forged a will. My aunt did the same to me. Thank you for saying what most of us don't have the means to fight. Support shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the narrative bent slightly toward truth. That's when Callista blinked. Her attorney reached out with an offer, full financial payout, public apology, quiet dismissal. I said no. This was never about the money, I told Jory. It's about accountability. Then came Lois's day on the stand. Under oath, she unraveled faster than any of us expected. I did what was best for the family, she snapped. Reuben didn't understand real-world logistics. Delara didn't have the spine for that land. My jaw tensed, but I stayed silent. Let the judge hear it all. He did. At the final hearing, the courtroom was packed, family on one side, supporters on the other, and a few local reporters in the back. The judge rifled through the documents once more, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up. It appears, he said, voice clear, that the land in question belongs to Miss Delara K. King, and has, for a very long time. No one moved. The silence cracked like a dropped glass. Lois swayed slightly, tried to speak, and fainted in her chair. Someone gasped. Callista's face drained of color, and her attorney leaned in close to whisper something no one else could hear. I didn't react. I didn't gloat. I simply folded my hands, closed my folder, and stood. Because claiming the land was never the hard part, keeping peace, I knew, would be the real test. The courtroom had emptied hours ago, but I remained seated in the back row, my coat still draped across my lap, untouched. The air smelled faintly of coffee and worn carpet, mundane reminders of the space where my world had tilted back toward justice. It was over, legally at least. The papers were filed, the judgment entered. My name, once erased, was back in black ink on county records. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow, like someone had blown the ashes off my life, and now I was left with whatever hadn't burned. Reuben's voice found its way into the quiet. Some fires burn just to clear the field for something new. 2 days later, I drove to the family home, not to reconcile. I didn't believe in that word anymore. I went for the boxes, old childhood things Mom had refused to throw out but never let me take. Lois didn't come to the door. The housekeeper opened it instead, wordlessly letting me in. The hallway still smelled like lemon polish, but it was colder now. No framed photos of me on the wall. Just Callista, at fundraisers, award banquets, ribbon cuttings. I gathered my boxes from the upstairs closet, marked with masking tape and the word Delara written in a hand that didn't look like hers. I didn't cry. I didn't linger. That place was no longer a home. It was a museum curated by people who'd chosen to write me out of their version of our story. The next morning, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar. Too careful. Too perfect. It was from Callista. I opened it slowly, half expecting venom, half preparing for apology. It was neither. She wrote, "We did what we thought was right. You've always been too idealistic to understand the pressure of legacy." No remorse, just rationalization. I folded the letter and placed it in the back of a drawer without response. I wasn't waiting for closure. I had created my own. Later that afternoon, I opened one of the boxes from the house. Inside were yellowed journals, old drawings, a photo of me holding a ribbon from the county fair. Tucked inside one of Reuben's ledgers was a note, nearly faded. "You were never invisible, just underestimated." I held that note longer than I intended. It didn't heal me, but it reminded me of something I'd forgotten, who I was before all of this. The next weekend, I drove out to the edge of the property, the land that was now officially mine. I parked beneath the crooked tree where Reuben once told me I'd do something great. The soil was softer than I remembered, and the horizon stretched wide, like it had been holding its breath. I sat in the back of my car, sketchpad in hand, and began outlining a garden, not for me, but for others, for veterans like Reuben, for single moms, for kids who needed to get their hands dirty and feel proud of something that grew. I didn't want to win. I wanted to give something back. A few days later, I received a message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. "I saw the story. I always wondered why you were pushed out. Thank you for standing up." The words made me pause. All this time, I thought I'd been screaming into a void. But maybe someone had always been listening, quietly, patiently, waiting for their own moment to speak. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting everything in gold, an email landed in my inbox. From a journalist. No fanfare, just a subject line. "Inheritance fraud feature. Are you willing to talk?" I stared out at the land, breathing in the scent of dry grass and fresh earth. This place held pain, but it also held purpose. I typed back, yes, but only if we talk about what it costs to fight for what's yours. The podcast episode dropped at dawn. I hadn't planned to listen, but there it was, my voice in someone else's headphones, filling rooms I'd never walked into. I spoke with the same tone I used in court, measured, deliberate, real, not angry, just honest. Silence isn't peace, I'd said. It's just a well-decorated cage. Within hours, the clip began circulating. By midday, the episode had charted in the top 10. Hashtags trended. Justice for Delara, hashtag legacy is earned. Inheritance, truth. And the video from the family dinner resurfaced again. Callista's voice laced with contempt, Lois's insults clear. This time, no one edited around the truth. DMs flooded in. Some were apologies, from old neighbors, college friends who'd ghosted, former coworkers who admitted they'd misjudged me, but most were from strangers. I saw what they did to you. They did the same to my aunt. You didn't just fight for your land. You fought for our stories, too. The court's final decision came in 3 days later. The judge ruled decisively. All titles reverted to me, retroactive to the original trust. Financial reparations were awarded. Lois and Callista were fined for obstruction and defamation. They sat quietly in court, neither offering eye contact. I didn't celebrate. I didn't speak to reporters. I picked up my folder, nodded at Jory, and walked out into the cold sunlight of the parking lot, letting the verdict settle around me like dust after a long storm. I had nothing left to prove. 2 months later, we opened the gates to the Reuben King Community Garden. No press conference, no ribbon cutting, just a simple welcome sign and a line of volunteers planting late-season kale beside rows of sunflowers. Veterans brought their grandchildren. Single moms asked about composting. A man who once served with Reuben stood near the tool shed and quietly cried. Reporters showed up anyway. I turned down every interview. This land, I told them, was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving I was enough. A week after the garden launch, I received a letter. The envelope was cream-colored, the handwriting unmistakable. My mother's. She wrote with her usual restraint. Elegant loops, nothing crossed out. Time has passed, maybe too much. I hope you'll consider sitting down one day, if not for me, for peace. I read it beneath the pecan tree Reuben had planted when I was born. The bark had grown gnarled, but the roots were steady. I folded the letter, tucked it in my pocket, and walked away. Some silences you break, some you preserve. That one was mine to keep. In the months that followed, I began hosting quiet sessions in the garden's tool shed, financial literacy workshops for women coming out of trauma, divorce, or long custody battles. No lectures, just shared stories, open spreadsheets, and hot coffee. Above the gate hung a framed map, laminated, mounted with care, the one Reuben had signed all those years ago. Underneath it, a quote carved into wood, "She grew where they buried her." The phrase wasn't meant to inspire revenge. It was about regrowth, about claiming your own space even when they tried to erase it. One evening, I walked the land at sunset, the way Reuben once did. The wind rustled through the wildflowers, and the sky was burning orange and lavender. I didn't feel haunted. I felt home. I didn't carry their shame anymore. I carried my grandfather's purpose. My name is Delara King, and this legacy, I earned every damn acre. Later that night, my inbox pinged. Subject: We believe your story isn't unique. Would you help others fight back? I stared at the screen, let the quiet sit for a moment. Then I began typing.